Lighting. Introduction to Lights. Welcome back to Maya with Lights. In the previous chapter, we shined with shading properties of Maya, and also we had a brief look at the various types of textures and lots of other stuff. So I hope you had some time to practice those, since it's all about practice in Maya, without which we can't imagine perfection in Maya. Alright, enough of the colors. We're on to yet another lightful aspect of Maya, and that is the lighting. Now, we briefly described about what lighting is in the Elements of Maya tutorial. Hopefully you had some good insight over lights over there. So from here on, we're going to create and work with lights in Maya. Alright, let's go on. Onto the scene. Before moving on to working with lights, let's first learn about the types of lights that we have in Maya and the ways of creating them and so on. And then we'll look into the unique attributes of them and the special effects that they're capable of producing in the lessons to follow. Now, here we have a scene with literally nothing in our viewport. Now, as I mentioned, we're not going into the attributes or, for that matter, any properties of lights in this tutorial, but we're just going to take a look at the types of lights and the process of creating them and such. Alright, now go to the Create menu, and over here we have the option Light in the drop-down list. Tear off the submenu so that we can work with it feasibly. Now here are 6 types of lights that we have in order, and they are ambient light, directional light, point light, spotlight, area light, and volume light. Not only on this menu, we can also create lights from the shelf editor, and here in the rendering tab. If I just click it, watch here at the very beginning. We have these 6 types of lights here. Now, if you're not sure as to which icon is which, then just place the cursor over the icons to find out the type of light with the tooltip. Now, just click once over the ambient light to bring it to our scene. Now, if I just translate it a bit and deselect the light, watch that the light is kind of a dark brownish red color. This is for easy identification of lights in Maya if we mess up our scene with a lot of objects in it. Now, create a poly object, possibly from the shelf, and then go to the wireframe mode if you're not there. Look, even then, we're able to view our light alienated from the poly object. Even though this is not a big matter of concern, it is my duty to give you the entire picture of what Maya has to offer us. Alright then, let me select the poly object, and then delete it. Now go ahead and click once over Directional Light to create a directional light. I can translate it, rotate it, or even scale this directional light. Now, if I select the ambient light we created earlier and translate it, we can translate the same. But if I rotate or scale it, watch that I can't rotate or scale the ambient light. Thus, we can't work with all the transform attributes for all the lights. Some do have constrictions, and we'll have to look into those as we move along. Now, if I bring in this outliner perspective view, and over here in the outliner we have our lights, we can select or rename them similar to the poly objects from here, or also by the other ways that we've discussed. Now go ahead and find out for yourself. Alright, so we're going to wind up here with this Intro to Lighting tutorial. In our next lesson, we'll take a look at how these objects differ in illumination. So, onward and forward. Common properties of lights. In the previous tutorial, we had a brief outline over the types of lights that we have here in Maya. From here on, we'll work with those options and find out what we can get. But first, in this tutorial, we will light our scene with any one of the 6 lights that we work with and with the attributes that are common to all of the lights that we have in Maya. Alright, let's get to business. Here we have a scene open in Maya. Now we're going to light this scene with any one of the lights. Say we'll do that with the spotlight. We'll bring in the spotlight from the rendering tab in the shelf. We can also do that from the Create menu, but for now we'll create it from the shelf. So go ahead and click this 4th icon from the first in the shelf, which is the option to create spotlight in our scene. Now if I just transform it, here we have the spotlight that we created. Now let me transform it so that it points our scene. Alright, it's okay from here, so let me hit Ctrl A to go to the Attribute Editor window with the light selected. Now, here we have 3 nodes for the light, similar to the nodes for the surface shaders. The last node is the default light node for the default lights we have in our scene. And these first two nodes are the nodes for the spotlight. And these attributes are to work with the spotlight. The first node has the option for the transformation attributes and other attributes for a light that are common to any other poly object or NURB surface. In the second node, which is the spotlight shape node, we have all these attributes to work within our light, which is just the spotlight. Now over here in the spotlight attributes options, we have this type option at the top. If I just click open this small arrow, here we have all the other lights, including our spotlight. Now if you recall, this is similar to the surface shaders, where we had shifted between the shaders even after its creation. This is in no way dissimilar to that. Thus we can shift between any lights even after its creation. With the spotlight left behind, let me click this IPR render button and take a render of our situation, which is simply the output of our scene. Here we have our object in the scene, and it is lit by the spotlight from the top. The spotlight lights only this much area of our scene, and we can manipulate the area of illumination with these few options here at the bottom, which we'll discuss very briefly in the tutorials to come. But for now, we wish to look in all the other options above, which are common to all the lights. For you to understand better, if I just shift this spotlight to area light, watch what happens. The top options remain, cutting off the other options, which are very much specific to the spotlight. Now, let me get back to that spotlight again. We could have worked with the area light itself, but it's easier to work with the spotlight than the area light. Now let me select an area from the render window for the updation of our outputs as we work with our light's properties. Now let me just resize this render window and place it aside. Now to the first option, color. Now I hope that you know what this option is going to do. Let me click open this color swatch, and as we adjust the color in the color palette, watch what happens in the render view. The color shade over the object changes. Thus, with this option, we can control the shade of the object also with the lights other than shaders. The next option is intensity, and as the name suggests, this controls the brightness of the light. As I tweak it, watch over here, the object's brightness gets varied. That is what this option is all about. Now this option illuminates by default when checked off, only illuminates the objects that are connected to the light, which will be discussed in greater detail in the light linking and breaking lessons. But for now, we'll just leave it as such and move on to the next option, Emit Specular. Earlier, I had applied a Phong shader over this object. Now if I just select the object, here we have the Phong shader node for our object, and over here we have the specularity option for the Phong shader. Now with the light selected again, if I uncheck this Emit Specular option, watch what happens. The specularity over our object has disappeared. Even though there is specularity, which comes in from the surface shader, we can disable the specularity of our objects from the light itself. Now let me check it again, and we have our specularity back once again. Now uncheck this Emit Diffuse option and watch what happens in our render view. We've lost sight of all of everything in our scene, except for the specularity over our object. But what has happened? Well, actually, we're viewing this scene with the light rays that bounce from the object on receiving the illumination from the spotlight. Thus, with this option unchecked, the light rays don't bounce from the object, and thus we aren't able to view it. Now to our last option, Decay Rate. Again, as the name suggests, it controls the intensity of the region of the illumination. Actually, this we'll discuss briefly in the coming tutorial, where we'll look into the specific attributes of lights. For now, we'll just tidy up this lesson here and move on to the next lesson, where we'll look into the properties that are unique to specific lights. Working with volume light. In the previous tutorial, we had a brief look at directional and area lights. Now here in this lesson, we'll take a look at the potential of volume lights. And then, in our next tutorial, we'll finish off with the spotlights to come to the end of our unique properties of lights. Right then, let's proceed with our volume light. Here is our scene waiting to be lit with the volume light. Now let's create it from the Create menu. And here in the Lights option, click once over the volume light. and here we have our volume light. Now let me scale this and place it so that it fits to the object in our scene. Now, let's go to the Attribute Editor window to work with the attributes of the volume light. Now before that, let me take an IPR renderer of this scene and just resize it. Watch, here we have our volume light lighting our scene with its attributes here. Now let me bring down this light shape option here in the Attribute Editor. Now currently the shape our volume light is sphere. Because of this option here, where we have the aforementioned sphere option. Now we have the various shapes for our volume light, and we can switch between these shapes to bring in the desired shape for our volume light. It's up to you to choose the desired shape that you wish for your volume light, depending upon your requirement. Now let me just leave it as is with the default option sphere. We can control the area of this volume light with this option called arc over here. Now watch as I bring it down. The area that this volume light covers gets reduced, and with that, the area of illumination also comes down. But what about this option, cone end radius? Well, it doesn't get highlighted, does it? This option is unique only for cone shape of our volume light. Now let me bring in the cone shape from this option. Now if I scroll down, watch here, we have this option, cone end radius, and it gets highlighted. But our cone volume seems a bit awkward, doesn't it? Well, this is because we are reducing the arc option. And while we're working with the sphere, it retains the same value for the cone. Now let me bring in this slider to its maximum, and now we'll get back the normal shape of our volume light. With that, if I just increase the cone end radius value, take a look. We're able to control the end radius of the cone with that region of the light. Now if I just place this pointer somewhere over here, the shape more or less simulates the effect of the cylindrical volume light. Now let me get back to the sphere light shape again. Now here in the volume light direction options, we can control the direction of the light within the region of the volume light. Now by default it's outward, and with the option that the light travels from the center and spreads to other regions within the shape of the volume light. This option more or less simulates the effect of the point light. Now if I select the option inward, well, the light travels from the inverse of the outward option, which means it travels from the boundary of the volume light to its center. Now, to the last option, downward axis. Watch what happens on its selection. It points the arrow to the bottom, and it emits its light from the top to the bottom, and not to the center of the object, which almost resembles the directional light. Now, before finishing our lesson, we'll look into the important option of color. Now, with this option, selected color, we are able to control the shade within our volume light. Now, if I just click this arrow mark, we can get this option as a separate tear-off window. This very left end controls the shade of the volume lights along the boundary. Now, this right end color controls the shade at the very center of volume light. Thus, the light transforms from white to black, from center to bottom. We can always go ahead and change these colors and can create a gradient of colors with these options. Now if I just click in here anywhere in this region, notice that we are able to add in a color at that point, and we can always clear it off by clicking over this cross button that comes along with the creation of that color range. With this option we can control the interpolation of our lights, which is simply the color gradient. Go ahead and try it out for yourself. Alright then, I think we've seen enough of the volume light, and yes, we'll wrap our lesson up here. In the next tutorial, we'll take a look at the most important light in Maya, the spotlight, and its properties. Working with the spotlight. In the previous tutorial, we were looking at volume lights. Now here in this tutorial, we'll finish off looking at the properties of the lights with the last one that is left on our list, and that is the spotlight. This is the most common used light in Maya, since it can be used for any type of lighting effect in Maya. Right then, let's go ahead and take a look at this very interesting light in Maya, the spotlight. Now here is our scene just waiting to be lit with the spotlight. First off, let's create a spotlight from the rendering shelf. And this is the spotlight icon. Let me click once over the icon, and here we have the spotlight in our viewport. Let me just bring it up a bit and scale it so that it's visible in our scene. The scaling of this spotlight will not have any sort of effect over the illumination of our object, so there's nothing to worry about scaling it. Now, I am scaling it so that we can view it better. Now, with that left behind, let me take an IPR renderer of this view and select this region as we always do. Now, the illumination takes place only within the cone range of the spotlight. Of course, its very characteristics for the spotlight. Now, if I just translate or rotate this light, watch what happens. We're able to position the area of this light over our object in the scene. If I just scale it, notice it has no effect over the area of illumination. Now with the light selected, evoke the attribute editor window. And here we have the attributes for the spotlight. We'll let off these options at the top, which we've gone through in the earlier tutorials. Now we'll just concentrate on those bottom options alone, which are very unique to the spotlight. Earlier in the tutorial, we scaled the spotlight, but we weren't able to increase or decrease the area of the spotlight. Then, how do we do that? Well, it can be done with the first of these options, the cone angle. If I just bring this slider back and forth, notice that we're able to extend or decrease the area of illumination. Now to the second option, Penumbra angle. Alright, I'd like to talk about this option now. If you watch carefully, the Penumbra angle value is currently 0. But watch the slider. It's placed at the center. Thus we have both positive and negative angles for this option. But what is all this Penumbra angle about then, eh? Well, it's a mathematical solution that controls the sharpness of the spotlight's edge. Watch as I bring down the value. It might look like the region that is covered by the spotlight comes down, isn't it? Well, it's the sharpness of the light that gets reduced from the outer region to the center. Now notice that these outer areas are very smooth, and as it moves to the center, it gets much sharper. Now if I bring this value higher, it inverses to what happened to the negative value. Here the softness extends from the center to the exterior region, and this is what the Penumbra angle is all about. And now to the last option, drop off. Well, drop off simply controls how soon the light dies off in our scene. Speaking still clearly, it controls the fall off of the intensity. Now, if I just increase this drop off value, watch the region of illumination, it gets reduced. Now, this is because the light dies off, or it loses its intensity, before reaching the edges. But how to understand that? Now, if I go ahead and increase the intensity, watch here. Now we're going to have the edges increase in intensity. Thus, drop-off and intensity counteract each other. Alright, so with that we're at the end of this lesson. And in our next tutorial we'll take a look at the wonderful potentials that the spotlight has in its quiver. The amazing spotlight. Hello there. In the previous tutorial we finished off looking at the properties of individual lights in greater detail. From here on, we'll be working with the special attributes of lights. And specifically in this tutorial, we'll be looking at the very special attributes of the spotlight. Alright, let's move into this lesson, shall we? Now we'll bring in a spotlight from the shelf and place it this way. Now let me take an IPR renderer from this scene and select this region so that we can view the effect of our spotlight as we work with our scene. Now with the object selected, if I hit T from my keyboard, watch that we get another translate gizmo. This is simply the placement gizmo, which I can translate and place it over an area to choose that region as the area of illumination of the spotlight. Now if I transform the light itself, notice that whichever direction I translate it, its focus remains on that area where we placed our gizmo. Now watch closely. The spotlight has a sort of blue-colored icon. If I click it once, watch so we get another gizmo. We can transform it to place it in our scene. Now let's leave it as such. But why is this? Well, this is simply the pivot of the light. The transformation of the light takes place based on the position of this gizmo. Now let's go ahead and click our gizmo again. Notice that we get a diamond-shaped icon over the edge of our cone. Well, if I click it and hold it and drag it in and out, eventually I can increase or decrease the circumference of the cone, and the area of the spotlight also varies. Now, what's all this about? Well, yes, it's the other option to adjust the cone angle. Watch as I start repositioning it. The cone angle option here in our attribute editor varies. Quite wonderful, isn't it? Now if I click the gizmo again, and if I zoom in, watch, we get another icon. This is simply the gizmo for adjusting the penumbra angle. As I adjust it, notice that it obeys the rules of the penumbra angle. Here in our output, we get the softness around the edges, and also in the attribute editor, the penumbra angle, the option gets updated. Now, do you think this gizmo is yielded enough? Now, that's the end of the options for the spotlight. Better think again. First, let me click this gizmo once again, and I will come back to you. Now, watch that as I finish my click, we get the cones split up, and we have numbers all around them. Well, I'll tell you what, this is Maya, and Maya is being Maya here. This is simply the decay regions for an option called the intensity curves in the spotlight. With these curves, we can vary the intensity within an area that was lit by the spotlight. Now, this we'll discuss very briefly in our next lesson. But here, we'll finish off this tutorial with yet another option of the spotlight, and this is called barn doors. Now, barn doors are simply the boundary lines with which we can define the region of illumination for the spotlight. Now, here we have a new scene, and the object in our scene is lit by the spotlight. Let's take a render of this scene and select the region so as to view the adjustments over our object, and then let me resize it and place it aside. Now, with the light selected, let me bring in the attribute editor window. And here in the Light Effects sub-option, we have an option called Barn Doors. Now, if I check that option, we have those options below highlighted. These are the options with which we're going to contain the illumination region of our spotlight, either from the left or right, or from the top or bottom. If I adjust the slider, notice that we can contain that region, but it's a little out of control. These we can work from the manipulator of our spotlight. Now, with the light selected, go to the Panels option and select Look Through Selected. Now we're viewing our scene from the view of our spotlight. Now if I hit T from my keyboard, we get these lines, which are simply the barn doors to work manually. Now, when we select it and precisely place it, very much control the region of the illumination of our spotlight. Quite wonderful, isn't it? Now with that, we're pretty much at the end of this lesson. In our next tutorial, we'll go ahead and look at the very important option of the spotlight called the intensity curves.